talk about the role of land trust in longleaf pine conservation, but then I'm going to really tell the story about this one property that we're working on. So if you saw Big Pine Preserve in some title, you're in the right place. So, um, okay. So, so land trusts have a significant role in longleaf pine conservation in the Southeast and particularly North Florida. We are out there. We work with private lands, so we find longleaf pine, properties that are worthy of conservation or restoration all the time, and we try to find ways to protect these properties. As a nonprofit land trust, our job is land conservation. And so a lot of what we do is land protection, working with private lands to get land into conservation. We do a lot of fundraising. We do a lot of outreach, um, all kinds of things. So, and then I'm going to talk about this case study of the Brennan property in Marion County, Florida, AKA Big Pine Preserve, but we're not there yet. So I'm going to call it the Brennan property. And then Marc is going to talk about the campaign to create Big Pine Preserve. Okay, so land trusts, reason we're really well positioned to do this work is we're often locally or regionally focused, and we work at the regional landscape level. And so I've just thrown in some various landscapes in North Florida that constitute project areas or service areas of various land trusts and such. So I like to say we think landscape, but we act local, right? But this gives us the advantage of working at a landscape level for specific goals, but then be provincial enough that we know the constituents, we know the lay of the land, and so on. Okay, I'm a really quick introduction to my landscape, the Ocala to Osceola Wildlife Corridor. It's about a 100-mile long area region here. It's actually part of the larger Florida Wildlife Corridor down here in this box. These green areas, this is not protected land. This is a vision or a blueprint for a system of connected landscapes, working and rural lands in Florida. So we're working on a piece of it, one piece of it, a linkage, okay? And so the O to O that we as we call it, is bounded by two large national forests, the Ocala and Osceola National Forests. And then it has a big Army National Guard base in the middle of it. So we work a lot in these interstitial areas trying to create this corridor. Our land protection goals, in short, are lofty, 140,000 acres by mid-century. And our landscape goals are wildlife, water, working lands, and such. And of course, longleaf is part of that. And so when we do this, it's one part, I like to say one part strategy and then a heaping cup of opportunity. So to the strategy side, we cook longleaf pine explicitly into our priority models. This is just a thumbnail of a GIS conservation priority model that we've made based on priorities of the partnership, the O2O partnership itself. And some data that are feeding into this are existing longleaf pine forests, or lands that where longleaf pine can be restored and such. So it puts a specific emphasis on longleaf pine to prioritize our land protection work. But then, of course, opportunity. We work with willing landowners. It's a willing landowner system. So we know the landscape. We work with landowners all the time. And largely, if you find a conservation-minded landowner, you're trying to link him or her up with appropriate conservation programs. And Marc will definitely talk about that more later. So this is exactly what happened with our parts of strategy and opportunity led us to the Brennan property, AKA the future Big Pine Preserve. This is a really interesting property in the middle of the O to O. I have a map next. The landowner is a multi-generational family, meaning this land has been in their family for 5-6 generations. They're ready to divest the land, but they want it to be protected, okay? So they contacted North Florida Land Trust. They know about our landscape initiative, and we negotiated a purchase, which Marc will talk about later, so I won't spend too much time there. But here's a picture of where the land is. It's about 500 acres, and there's our O to O landscape. It's down here, right in the middle of the Ocala National Forest right here. Here it is on the lakes, on the shores of Lake Carr. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Ocala National Forest, it is it's the world's largest sand pine scrub, and that's mostly this hatched area. In the midst of this sea of scrub are longleaf pine islands. They're not literal islands, but they're known as pine islands. And they are about 30,000 acres all in, one of the largest longleaf pine sandhill landscapes in peninsular Florida. And so there's our property. It's actually a little bit of Riverside Island and then this other Carr City or Carr Island right here. And it's all longleaf. It's confirmed longleaf. And okay, so moving in closer in, our property that we're working to protect is 3 parts. And it's very interesting, aside from the ecology and the longleaf, it bookends historic Carr City, which is a ghost town, but it was an active citrus town until the freezes of the late 1800s. It has a county boat ramp. It is surrounded by national forests, but then also significantly this settlement over here, which is a fairly densely populated lakeshore settlement of Salt Springs. And just here's some historic images of Carr City. Carr City now, the remnants of it are on the National Historic Registry. And these photos are actually from the late 1800s. There's the lake shore right there. It still looks like that, very much like that today. Okay, so of course, with these pine islands comes red cockaded woodpeckers. These pine islands support one of the largest, if not the largest, red cockaded woodpecker populations in peninsular Florida. And there's some trees right next door to our offer property. And so you see that if protecting this land and restoring the habitat would augment the suitable habitat available for RCWs. And even more importantly, it would make a stepping stone between this subpopulation here and this subpopulation there. So landscape wise, it's really well positioned for the RCW and a host of other imperiled species I'm not even mentioning. And there's evidence of, these are not the greatest pictures, but evidence of former RCW habitat or use on the property itself with these old inactive cavities. Okay, so much of the property, I mean, is upland longleaf pine sandhill that is fire suppressed. Okay, this is not uncommon in private lands. However, it did have burning occasionally through the 1990s, and there are still patches, open patches with supporting ground cover, as you can see here. A lot of it looks like this, a lot of oak encroachment and so forth. And like I mentioned, if we don't protect this, the next step is probably residential development as the town of Salt Springs, if it was sold and converted to residential neighborhoods. Well, we started poking around here. We started seeing a lot of big trees and old trees, bumpy trees, wavy trees, and then we started getting our tree hugging on here. And so we asked, or I got my good friend, Dr. Jean Huffman, out there earlier this year to age some of these trees, see what we're dealing with here. And she did. She cored with the increment borer there, kind of like taking a biopsy of the tree, right? Take it and then count the rings and estimate the ages. She did 6 trees, and they all ranged in age from 100 to 300 plus years old. So, and there was no correlation, of course, with size. So the little bumpy one was the oldest one, and here is the oldest one. So we affectionately call one bump for obvious reasons there. So one bump was conservatively put at 300 years old, maybe older. She's just did a conservative age estimate. She can also tell kind of its life history from the tree rings. It's stressed in recent decades, not surprisingly. Look at all those oaks back there. So it's alive, it's doing well, but it's stressed. We want to save it. So then we hired a consultant forester, Ralph Jowett, who's right there, to come in and map the stand and give us more data. And he mapped about at least 80 acres of old growth right here in this central piece, and then hundreds of acres of mature longleaf with even ranging up to 100 plus years old. So the stand map looks like that. and he was really impressed with the old growth stand. So we figured, well, we kind of got our bona fides on the old trees. He actually mapped trees for us. So this is what the distribution of greater than 25-inch DBH trees looks like. Those are pretty big trees. Quite a number of them. You can see they're in little clusters over here. And then some over here in this piece too. Okay. Well, this is the same central piece in 1958. I put this on here because you can really see it there. You can see those old trees back when it was more open and probably, you know, less fire suppressed. This, by the way, is the old stagecoach road that bisects the property. And this is historic Kerr City here. So this is the old roads from the 1800s. Okay. Well, then of course we've been big tree mania, looking for like the biggest tree out there. And here's a real beauty that's forked. And we thought, oh, at 41 inches diameter, we got a new state champ. Well, it's disqualified because of obviously it's forked and it's probably two trees growing together and so on. But there's the state forester checking it out. And also I want to show what do they call these podiums of duff accumulation. Of course, there's a lot of that going on. But then our other second fork tree at 36 inches diameter is at that girth does exceed the current state champ. But again, we have the fork issue, although this one is higher up. And without getting too far into the vagaries of state champ, you know, determination, I'll leave it. It's being evaluated. So it's the contender at this point. So, and then interestingly, the current co-state champ is out there. There's a beauty, single, no fork, beautiful tree. It's about 100 feet from our offer property on the next door. And so in the long term, we'd love to save this tree too. Beautiful tree, about 30, it's 109 inches in circumference. Okay, so we gathered the data, we took a lot of pictures and stuff like that. Is it old growth? Well, I think so, or it's pretty darn close. It kind of depends on who you ask and what criteria you use, but we have old pines, yep, well over 150 years old, which the literature tells us is old growth relative. We have snags, conchs, flat tops, all that stuff. I didn't put all those pictures in there. We have old RCW cavities, check. We do have uneven age size classes. I don't show that, but the forester did find longleaf down to 6 inches diameter. What is lacking, not surprisingly, is regeneration because in its fire suppressed condition, not a whole lot of longleaf regeneration. So I'll give it a check minus. We have ground cover and patches, you know, again, fire suppressed, but it's out there, check minus. And of course, natural processes, we don't have fire. But we have the old pines and we have the makings for a beautiful, beautiful longleaf old growth stand. And as we know, old growth longleaf pine is exceedingly rare, estimated 10 to 12,000 acres in the entire historic range. So I'm good. Here's my superlative statement. The Brennan property is the largest unprotected old growth stand in Florida, maybe the Southeast. Maybe y'all can tell me if I'm wrong. Okay. All right. So if we can protect it, there are many restoration challenges. We got to protect it first. But, you know, this just shows us, since it's right next to Ocala National Forest land, there's more or less our desired future condition. So if we can move from this to this, I think we can in maybe a couple decades. But we have to, of course, you know, reintroduction of fire, reduction of oaks, all that stuff. But we got to protect it first. So with that, here's the deal. I'm going to hand it over to Marc.
And Marc, we do have about 10 minutes left. So just so you keep an eye.
All right. Can you hear me? Can you see me? All right. Perfect. 10 minutes is more than I need. So I know you all are digesting lunch. So I'm going to try to make this a little bit of fun in terms of both kind of understanding the positive role land trusts can play in trying to coordinate larger acquisitions, financially larger acquisitions like this one, but also talk a little bit about the strategies and very adaptive strategies that sometimes have to be deployed in acquisition. So speaking to the Brennan property, We do, in this case, have a $5.6 million property under contract with the property owner, which they agreed under these circumstances to actually give us a donation of that value of $1.1 million. It's an 18-month option agreement. So that is what we are working with. We have 18 months to try to find $4.5 million. And so, oops, sorry. Assuming it'll let me progress the slide here. So, ideal scenario is always that you have one property is going to get done by one funding source. I'll tell you, I've done about 150 conservation acquisitions in my career so far. That has happened maybe 10 times. It is not the common way that, at least from the nonprofit side of things, or really even from a lot of the state and federal agency side of things, that these deals get done. They're often a cobbling together of multiple funding sources. And so when we looked at the Brennan property, like I said, first looking at a $5.6 million property, complicated because if you look at a lot of grants, their funding ranges are in the $1 to $2 million maximum amount. It's an intimidating thing to try to take on at the first. But the good news is right at the start, $1.1 million bargain sale. And it's really nice that knowing that as soon as you sign the contract, you're like 20% of the goal is done. But of course, there's still $4.5 million out there to find, which still kind of feels like, that's a huge number in dollar amount. And you kind of sit around there going, whoa. And eventually some person, which you'll come up with a not very nice term for that person in a later time, suggests that, oh, well, don't you just have donors who can meet all that gap? As if we all magically have, just unicorn donors out there who are going to give $4.5 million towards our goals. In some cases, in some places, I've seen it happen. Those are the times that really make the news, right? Because they're all so exciting. But what we don't get is that that's really an extreme minority of cases that groups are able to come out with $4.5 million of private funds. The reality is we have to be a little bit more realistic. And so, we have a fundraising team on staff at the North Florida Land Trust. We had a good conversation. What can we do? Well, I think we can safely pull $1.5 million from our donor base as is. We might be able to exceed that, but in planning for this campaign, that's what we're going to shoot for. And so they have their own marketing campaign. If you guys ever wanted to have a conversation about that, that's a whole class in and of itself, right? But they're going to shoot for that. The $3 million remaining funding, that's public funding. That's what we're going to try to target to get out of there, out of different either grant sources, or what we've been successful with a lot of the time is public-private partnerships with different agencies as well. And when we do these things, we kind of start with a strategy that's based in the land, right? We take a look at the property itself and we look at the public benefits and we say, what are those benefits? And then we try to correlate those benefits with different funding sources which are targeted at those same benefits at the same time. So you take a look at the Brennan property, and we kind of broke it up into 5 different benefits categories. One is, the unique natural feature is the old growth longleaf pine. There's tons of endangered species benefits. Susan talked about red cockaded woodpecker, but we also have Florida scrub jay, Florida sand skink, gopher tortoises, indigo snakes, Florida pine snakes, so on and so forth down the list. There's a lot of T&E benefits. As Susan said, there's a nationally registered historic site associated with it. It also sits on an area of very high aquifer recharge in an area that's dominated by very significant springs. And finally, Susan didn't get into in our preservation, but it actually falls in a restricted airspace for the Navy. And so it's also the potential interest for the Department of Defense. So we kind of break it out and then we pursue a strategy. And to be honest, I left history off of here because for a $4.5 million campaign, I love historic projects. That amount of money or a significant amount of money usually just does not exist. So we broke it into what are the 4 things that we think we can get money from. And then we started talking to the agencies associated with that. So we started out with the agency that we thought was probably the first and most directly benefiting partner. We talked to our good friends at the U.S. Forest Service, and they have an endangered species mission. They have a unique natural features mission. They love old growth longleaf pine. And we said, hey, can you help us fund this? And they said, oh my gosh, we love this project. But unfortunately, we're broke. We do think we could requisition some funds, but it will be 3 to 4 years before we get there. Well, the property owner is 85. So that's a heck of a gamble right there. And so we said, great, well, that may not work for us. And they said, we'll support you with a letter of support. We'll actually help you network with other funding sources. Great. Forest Service, thank you. Then we went to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, right? And they also have an interest in old growth longleaf pine and endangered species. And we told them about the project. They also said, we love it. And we have some money. Not enough money to get the whole $3 million gap, but we do have some money. But we lack the spending authority at this time to be able to spend it. And you kind of asked the question, what does that mean? Is we have money in a bank account, but we do not have the congressional authorization to spend it at this time. Well, when do you think you might have the authorization? Well, maybe next year. And you can see the sweat start to break out as I think about an 18-month contract and what that might mean in terms of federal funding authority. So we say, okay, Fish, well, when we get there, 6-9 months, I'll check in and we'll see what we can do. All right. And they say, yeah, we'll support you with letters of support. They love it too. And then we talked to USDA NRCS and, the largest singular funder of conservation in the country. And they said, oh, we also love it. We have the money. We have the spending authority. And we got really excited. But unfortunately, the staff position that is associated with that funding is not staffed at this time. And it is unclear to us at this moment when it will be staffed. So, okay, let us know when it's staffed, guys. We're going to continue forward. At this point, we're starting to get fairly frustrated, and no fault of our partners. We've definitely been there with them before. And we turned around to somebody who, frankly, in my experience, has been a great funding partner, the Department of Defense. And we went to them and we said, hey, there's this property in your restricted airspace. If it gets built on, I know you guys have the best pilots in the world, but it is a live bombing range that's nearby. And if they make a mistake, there could be bombs on houses. And they said, bombs on houses? And we said, yeah, bombs on houses. And they said, that sounds bad. And we went, yeah, that's pretty bad. And they went, we're in. And of course, the money that they want to pursue is a competitive source. So, it's not guaranteed, but hey, they're for small victories. And this kind of starts to give you guys the idea of what a lot of these campaigns involve in terms of Susan and my time and talking to partners, because it's not just the federal guys. We have in there the state agencies as well. And we have talking to all these folks. And then there's what I call the semi-quasi-governmental institutional foundations as well are in there, local government, so on and so forth, which gets you to, oh, wait, what happened during this contract time period? COVID-19, which kind of blew up quite a bit of that, in the style basically like that. No one knows what anybody's able to do at all at these times. But luckily, we have patient property owners who are going to understanding that some things are gotten screwed up right now. So that's good. But, if at this point you're starting to feel mine and Susan's stress, we definitely understand. It's kind of like playing 3-dimensional chess in a $4.5 million victory pot, right? And it's easy to get kind of stressed out because on top of that, there's issues of whether or not the different funding sources can actually match each other. Federal can't always match federal, state always can't match state. There's a difference between the upfront and the reimbursement grants, where the reimbursement grants, can we get a loan and then hope we get reimbursed by this grant in the future? Not all these funding sources will buy a property for fee, but maybe they can buy a conservation easement from us to help take down part of the purchase price. There's the difference. Some sources of funding don't allow a private nonprofit to apply for it. So can we go to a local county commission meeting and get them to be a partner in the deal? And by the way, they all have different acquisition rules. Some of them have different rules for appraisals. So sometimes you have to get 2 different appraisals, which will show 2 different values for the property, just to complicate things. So there is all this potential for stress and worry, and it does get very frustrating at times, and it's easy to get stressed out. But then you kind of remember that, hey, this is a cool project. You've been here before on 149 projects previous. And on the important ones, the one where you really stayed committed, you'll get there. Your partners, even though they have their own internal frustrations, are at the end of the day wholly supporting you. And hopefully you can put this together. And we do think we can put this together. But if anybody knows of a $3 million unicorn out there, we're happy to hear from you. So with that, that's my little bit about the campaign so far. and let's make Big Pine Preserve a reality.
Thank you so much, Susan and Mark. We really appreciate you guys maximizing your allotted time here, because we got cut short a little bit in regards to the link issues. So with that, I will recognize that we are over just a little bit. So if anyone needs to bow out at this time, I totally understand. We just for reference, our next event in the conference is at 1:15. It's a musical moment with Abigail Dowd. And so we have a little bit of time right now. So I thought we could go ahead and just have a few questions. But if you need to leave, we totally understand. I will also just let you know that following Abigail's musical moment, we will continue the conversation about land trusts with a panel. And that panel is specifically going to talk about what Susan alluded to earlier in her presentation of once a property is successfully conserved through this acquisition process, there's a whole nother level of issues and steps in terms of the management and restoration, particularly for a site like this that has a long history of fire suppression. So please come back and join that panel at 2 p.m. Eastern with several land trusts being represented there. We do have a few comments and such, but I had a quick question. Mark alluded to some of the rare species of concern from the animal perspective. And Susan, I was hoping maybe you could share with us if there were any particular plant species that were of note. I know you gave the ground cover a check minus, but I wondered if there were any kind of pluses from a ground cover perspective.
Oh gosh, well, I've looked for some like state endangered and things like. There's one Stylisma albida actually.
Okay.
Oh yeah, as a record nearby, and I looked for it. I didn't find it. So I'm gonna go with no right now. But even if there were, I mean, this sounds kind of there's like, it's not a way to get funding. Really, not a great way, unless it's, some, I don't know, something really, really rare or something. So I haven't found anything particularly rare out there. Now, the ground cover thing is, in my experience, even if, you have patches of ground cover. The foresters also, it was very interesting. They noted when they did their cruise, anytime they saw any wiregrass, even like a little tiny little blade or something like that. In my experience, if you have any wiregrass remnants or something, you can get it back, right? If you carefully reintroduce fire. The trick is going to be reintroducing fire without killing those trees, right? But if you reintroduce fire, I think there's a lot of opportunity to get a fairly decent ground cover back here. So does that answer your question? Or
yeah, absolutely. I'm a plant ecology person in background, and also in Central Florida. So some of those rare species have a special place in my heart. So I was just curious if any of them.
Oh yeah, I think there's the Asclepias lutonia, or the Polygonella lutonia. Yes, that's nearby, but
that is my introduction to longleaf pine plant ecology research. So
awesome.
That gives a thumbs up from Sarah. So thank you for that. We have a question about how some of these barriers that you received from the federal partners, how those are those current situations, but how they might change, and particularly with the upcoming election, and if you could just speak to broader how you balance these projects with that in that political climate when things do change quite rapidly sometimes.
So I will say it is, if you're trying to get money from government sources, it is significant to avoid the conversation of politics at large. But that being said, I mean, only some of the problems we have are based on difference in administration. So if you're looking at, the difference between the Obama administration, the Trump administration, I mean, there are definitely some things that have changed. I think what we've seen a little bit more with this administration is that there's a failure to do a lot of appointments. in a lot of the agencies, which has just created administrative hurdles in some of these programs, in that there's just not anybody to sign a document that has to be signed at the end of the day. With that being said, a lot of the problems we have, and a lot of that presentation was very teasing of our federal partners. They truly are great. But the reality is this is stuff that has been consistent for me for 15 years in doing the land acquisition side of things. So when you deal with the feds, it's slow. It's there's staff turnover at times. There's, rule changes, because sometimes it is an 18-month process and all of a sudden there's a rule change on month 9 and you have to kind of do everything over again. It just kind of is what it is. But I mean, the advantage is that the funding sources there are often a lot greater than what you can get at home, kind of depending on your circumstance. We do have programs like the Florida Forever program in Florida, which can be pretty significant funding sources. Unfortunately, this property is not in a Florida Forever project area, which is why we've had to be fairly inventive with how we pursued funding. So, but I mean, it's just kind of the reality of the business is more what I was getting to. I could be very hopeful that an administrative change will make the federal government all of a sudden do these things in like 6-month timelines, but experience has not taught me to be hopeful.
Yeah, no, we appreciate that insight, and it definitely, you can imagine some of these hurdles, but the way that you guys laid it out with Susan teeing up this exciting property and captured us all, and we're all behind it, and then Marc had a great reality check in all of the hurdles that.
Well, and I should mention, my experience has been that we do get there. It's just that it happens in the last 3 months, and it's always a panic attack. But it's just like once people realize that this really cool property that everybody has kind of verbally committed to, and frankly, agency people have gone to and they love it, all of a sudden, that you're not at the bottom of everybody's pile anymore. And that can be very frustrating, but it is just kind of what it is.
Well, we appreciate both of you joining us today and sharing this project, and we look forward to the official designation of it as a preserve in the future, and to hear that unicorn success story. So we have, so with that, we'll sign off. We have about 5 minutes until y'all can jump over and see Abigail's final musical moment for us. And we thank y'all for being with us.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.